Hey everyone, welcome to a Errata video. Today we're going to be looking over the videos that I've made thus far in my From Software boss analysis series, Dark Souls 2, Bloodborne, Dark Souls 3, Sekiro, and Demon Souls, and take a look at some of the really helpful comments that have corrected things I've messed up, or just have some really helpful insight. Unlike a lot of my other videos, this one's not going to be scripted. I've never done an unscripted video before, so I'm kind of testing out the waters here. If it isn't your thing, no hard feelings, no foul. I'm kind of just trying this out. So, the first thing I wanted to go over was the fact that a couple people pointed this out, but I kind of named the series in a misleading way. I have not played any of the King's Field or Armored Core games. I want to play Armored Core 6. It's been on the list, but I just haven't had time for it, and there's so many other games I want to play. I want to play Lies of P. I've been finishing another run of Baldur's Gate 3, and I have such a massive backlog right now that going back and playing all those King's Field games or those early Armored Core games would be historically cool, but I have other things that I want to play more. But with that, I wanted to dive into Dark Souls first. The first one was someone who pointed out something about Asylum Demon that I neglected to mention. Mainly, if you come up onto the balcony and you look down and you just wait there, if you wait for too long, the Asylum Demon will jump up and swat you. You'll take a massive amount of damage, your balcony will break, and the entire "you're now in control" start of the fight is turned on its head because you doubted yourself. It forces you into, when you take that step through the fog gate, you have to act quickly. The Capra Demon. I did not think the Capra Demon would get as much love as it did. First, I want to point out I was a little off. He does not use the Asylum Demon soundtrack. He uses the Centipede Demon soundtrack. But one commenter, Rigorm136, mentioned the Capra Demon serves as a poise check. By this point, you should have access to a number of different armor sets. You should have access to the Wolf Ring, which means that you can have poise before the gargoyles. And if you don't have it before the gargoyles, you probably should have it by here. Personally, I think saying, "oh, the dogs are there to make sure you have poise so that you can spam through," still doesn't really show Capra Demon in the best light. It still means it is a boss encouraging spam rather than having a detailed moveset to learn and integrate with. Like, you can throw dung pies over the fog gate at Capra Demon. That doesn't make Capra Demon a better boss because there's something you can do to get rid of bad design. That said, there is a lore reason for the dogs that, I don't know how to pronounce this, B1GK. According to his key, he is effectively a mob boss at the bottom of the bird, which is why he's in such a green spot, and the dogs are mooks. He is in control of this area. That's why there's so many ambushes. That's why there's this straight shot. That's why he's in this little insular chamber. But it's a really neat design decision. It just didn't turn into a good fight, but it is some cool lore. Heading to the butterfly is a good point to bring up something that I also neglected to mention. Namely, build variety. When I play Dark Souls, as you probably saw through the video, I like to two-hand weapons, and I like to focus on rolls. And for some of these bosses, that definitely hurt me more than others. Capra Demon was one of them. The Butterfly was another one of these bosses. Different builds can have entirely different experiences. As this guy mentions, that's a lot of time to go in, but it's a universal thing that applies not only to Dark Souls, but to kind of all of these games, including even Sekiro, which I'll get to when I get to there. There's a lot of stuff in Sekiro in terms of builds and strategies that I did not even touch on. But with the Butterfly in particular, the Butterfly is a lot less of a slog if you're using ranged attacks. In the same way that I mentioned in Demon Souls that bosses encourage you to utilize ranged attacks, the Butterfly almost is encouraging you to do that, because if you use those ranged attacks, it becomes so easy to overpower it. But if you aren't using the ranged attacks, it's also easy so long as you aren't underleveled. So it doesn't do quite as well as the Vanguard or the Phalanx in terms of forcing you to think outside the box, to use consumables, to use magic items, but it does try to do that. Next, the Gaping Dragon. This one was me not giving the Gaping Dragon his due in some other videos. When I talk about Midir, I talk about the usage of the head as the weak point being introduced in order to improve the dragon fight. The Gaping Dragon has a vulnerability on his head. NYFT3352, you are 100% correct there. Unlike Midir, Gaping Dragon leans towards it is more dangerous if you are in front of it, because you have to react faster to its charge than if you're to the side, so you are rewarded for risk with more damage. But that's also something I neglected to give Gaping Dragon a accolade for. Having a risk-reward system of being able to do more damage to its head when it slams down if you know the timing of that charge, especially with how much damage the Gaping Dragon does, how much the risk it does exist there, that's a really fun, engaging piece of design. Next, this isn't something I got wrong. The Iron Golem's music tells you to get good. And I had never heard this before. And I'm going to play the clip now, just so you can hear it. So that exists, and I don't know why I didn't know about it. That's not really a correction, I just needed everyone else to know that that existed. Moving into Lost Izalith, Ceaseless Discharge has a instant kill that you can get. If you get the armor and then run back to the entryway of the area, Ceaseless Discharge will jump towards you, grab onto the wall, you hit his hand a couple of times as he falls back off the cliff, dying instantly. The issue, as Killer Monkey is mentioning here, is that it's kind of hard to tell what's actually happening. His hand is clipping into the wall, so it feels like you're utilizing a glitch, but it's definitely intended because there are unique animations. Or if it's not intended, it was at some point intended because those animations were made. I wish that it was more detailed than it was. I wish that there was more put into this concept of knocking Ceaseless off the cliff, because right now it doesn't really engage with anything. The thought of, oh, if I run back to the introduction, instead of doing his area burst attack, he'll jump at me and I can knock him off the cliff, does not feel natural. You just don't have enough information to make that. And even when I learned about the insta-kill, I didn't even realize that's what was happening. I thought it was just an insta-kill glitch. The Great Grey Wolf Sith. I did not mention another thing that for me cements Great Wolf Sith as an S grade. If you do the DLC and you fought Artorias and beaten Manus and saved Sif, who you can find in the DLC while she was younger, Sif recognizes you in the opening cutscene and still gets ready to fight you. The first cutscene was solemn and set this tone. This cutscene is legitimately sad. Also, with Sif and kind of Artorias here, their moveset is almost identical. The backspin that Sif has exactly mimics the backspin Artorias has. Obviously, Artorias' things are a little more vertical, where Sif's go a little more horizontally, but there's a lot of cool similarities between their moveset that ends up being really impressive, and utilizing movesets to align these bosses even closer together, which I always love. Out of all the corrections, this was the correction that I received the most. And it's the Four Kings. There is not a randomness to their attacks. The Four Kings sword does 2 types of damage. If they hit you with the base of the weapon, they will deal very, very little damage. If you are far enough away that they hit you with the blade of the weapon, it will deal a ton of damage. I do wish that they had more varied movesets, that there were more lunges maybe that could hit with the sweet spot while you were up against it, because the effect of this sweet spot is if you're far away from it, then you take that random damage while you're at a disadvantageous state, or if you're next to them, they pose no threat and you just put on stone armor or Havel's armor, which is a problem. One last thing, for Manus, I did not actually know that the closing circle had a safe spot if you move towards Manus, which is a really fun, engaging piece. That said, I actually like a lot of Elden Ring boss magic. I have some issues with the Elden Ring bosses. The magic or the unique patterns of attacks will not be one of those issues. But I just thought that the fact that the closing circle had a safeguarded spot and that there is a curve that you can run in to avoid the rain, I had never noticed that, and I'm definitely going to try that on my next run. I wanted to bring that up for everyone else to see. That's all the stuff that I, at least at the moment, have for Dark Souls 1. Which means now it's time for Dark Souls 2. And the first thing to bring up is the fact that I played Scholar of the First Sin, and I've never played the base Dark Souls 2. There is a lot of hate in the comments for Scholar of the First Sin. There was one comment in particular that pointed out for the... I don't know where the comment is, actually. I lost the comment, but someone even made a comment that the dragon in front of Old Dragon Slayer is not there in the original Dark Souls 2. They just put it there. But that is a Scholar of the First Sin, not a Dark Souls 2 sin. Still, moving ahead through that, I wanted to kind of clarify something. I'm not a Dark Souls 2 fan, but a lot of comments were saying I hate it because it's not Dark Souls 1. I hate Dark Souls 2 the most when it's trying to be Dark Souls. The bosses where Dark Souls 2 shines the most for me, of Nishandra, of the Burnt Ivory King, are playing with concepts that you do not find elsewhere in Dark Souls. More heavy focus on mob control, more heavy focus on thematic mechanics that are notably unfair, that it's not something you can dodge. It is something that, oh, you're around this, you'll take damage, you'll take curse, you'll be afflicted by this. There are these really interesting mechanics in this game here that feel like they're limited by the fact Dark Souls 2 is a Dark Souls game, that you have your role, that you have these attacks. There is really good stuff in Dark Souls 2. The worst part about Dark Souls 2 is the Dark Souls. And that feels like a weird contradiction because I love this series so much, but I love experimental Souls-like games, and this game, Dark Souls 2, was made so early on, before Souls-like was a genre that we discussed, that was regularly in there. Dark Souls 2 started to break away from that, but it was still a little too tied to Dark Souls. I wish that Dark Souls 2 was not Dark Souls 2, not because I don't think it had the potential to live up to Dark Souls, but because I think it was a little restricted by the fact that it was trying to be a sequel. Because there are really good ideas. The designers who worked on Dark Souls 2 worked on Dark Souls 3 and worked on Bloodborne. These are good designers. They have made games we like. We know they can make games of high quality. Dark Souls 2 was just held back by trying to be something it wasn't. That's a bit of a tangent, but I wanted to clarify that because I do respect Dark Souls 2 as a game. And I'm not of the opinion of, oh no, it's a good game, it's just a bad Dark Souls game. It is a good game, just one I don't like. And the first part is bringing up some demon lore. Demons in Dark Souls 2 is not the same term as demons in Dark Souls 1. Demons in Dark Souls 1 were the progeny of the Bed of Chaos. They all came specifically from that. But the Flame of Chaos is not in Drangleic because the Burnt Ivory King is a badass. And so, demon is just really tied with the more traditional term of some being of sin, or some being of monstrosity. The Smelter Demon is just a golem, the Covetous Demon is gluttonous to a point of sin, the Demon of Song is just a monster that dwells and utilizes song as a weaponry. There is not a connection between all of them. They are demons because they are all monsters, not because they are all connected to something. So, thank you for clarifying that in the comments. That brings me to fun little detail on the Smelter Demon that makes me like him even more. There's apparently a fountain outside the arena that if you roll through it, you get a buffed fire resistance to even further nullify the force chip damage, which is really fucking cool. I only wish that the Smelter Demon's area was less populated with hordes and hordes of Elan Knights, because this is great. I really love, in the Smelter Demon's area, there's that entire smelter thing outside that you can drop into, that there's wheels that you can turn off steam. That's one of my favorite environmental things, and the fact that there is something in that area that can actually give you that buff. If I'd found it before, I hadn't noticed what it had done, but that is a really cool detail that the Smelter Demon and his area definitely deserve a heavy shout out for. We've got a couple more things in the base game. First one, Royal Rat Vanguard is cute. This is correct. I neglected to mention this. His mohawk is fashionable. He's very cute. Still a bad boss. Next, we're going to go into the DLC, which we are going to start with the Burnt Ivory King. This one being a criticism of that, being that sometimes it can struggle with the boss if you're having to fight it over and over and over again because that first phase can feel so long. Personally, like I said in my section about Dark Souls 2 in general, it's one of the times that Dark Souls 2 really branches out and does its own thing. It's one of the reasons why I think Dark Souls 2 is still a game worthy of discussion and worthy of being suggested. Sin also needs a shout out, because he also has a weakness on his head. And according to this commenter, I'm having a hard time verifying it because it's a little bit back and forth. The body is corrosive and will drain your durability further than the head. So fighting the head does not only a little more damage, but also removes the durability issue I was talking about. I feel like I want to try the next time I go through Sin, focusing on landing myself next to the head. In the same way that as I got better with Pursuer, I learned more and more how to walk into position to avoid some of his weapons. I feel like Sin might have some of that I've missed, and that would fix a lot of the durability issues and be another step in that process towards Midir in an even bigger way. Of Gaping Dragon had this weakness. Sin discouraged you from attacking the body in a way that Gaping Dragon didn't, which eventually led to Midir's existence. So I want to fight Sin again, knowing this, because that is a really cool step towards Midir that I did not give him credit for. And before we finish DLC, there are two things. First one, the Afflicted Grave Robbers have one piece of good design, a thing that I had no idea. They can hurt each other. I had it in my video and I didn't even notice. So kudos to you, Extreme Sam, for noticing, which is really weirdly neat. Like, I don't know why this boss did it when there's so many other multi-bosses that don't, but the Afflicted Grave Robbers do. The Afflicted Grave Robbers, the Lion Twins, and the Blue Smelter Demon are put in what are called co-op areas, and I didn't really reference this. Grave Robbers and the Twin Lions I can see being defended by this, particularly the run to the Twin Lion Arena. The Blue Smelter Demon still feels weird to be in a co-op area because it is... I personally enjoy fighting the Smelter Demon more when it's a one-on-one fight, because it is such a tightly designed creature, but the Grave Robbers and Lion Twins being designed around having multiple things so that you were splitting their aggro is something I didn't mention. And my last Dark Souls 2 comment is about Aldia. Namely, that Aldia is not trying to get you to question a specific question within the story, but to question the existence of the story in the first place. Why are there these dualities? Why must you light the fire or become the Dark Lord? Why can you not find something new? As this person mentions, that's kind of held back by the fact that once you beat Aldia, you are forced into this dual choice. There is not a third option. Alright, and now it's time for Bloodborne. And we're starting with another thing that was commented a lot. It is Vicar. I pronounced that wrong throughout the entire video. And while we're at pronunciations, I only got one person who actually pointed it out. Thumerian does not have an N in it. I don't even know if I'm saying it right now. I'm looking at it and my brain is just like, new. Despite the fact that the English language does not and has never made an N sound out of the letters PTH. We're now gonna pop over to Bloodstarved Beast real quick. Namely, a couple bits of lore. I mentioned that Bloodstarved Beast has little to no lore. There is actually a lot of really cool details. The first one is that it's possible that the Bloodstarved Beast is sentient to an extent, that it has intentionally put itself in this church to let Jura protect it. That's why it is so far away and why it is not hunting. It is not because it's stuffed away in a corner, it's because it's stuffed itself in a corner. The other one is, of course, there is another Bloodstarved Beast that is hanging up on a crucifix that the beasts are worshipping as you head down towards it. People of Old Yharnam were treated with an antidote despite the fact that the beasthood was a curse. So, ends up being a bit of a lore question of, so these are people who, rather than having the curse treated, were treated for poison, and once they turned, they are overwhelmed with poison. Where did the poison come from? Which, really fun stuff that the Bloodstarved Beast does set up. On top of that, the Bloodstarved Beast is female. I'm not certain if people have already watched the video. There is a really, really good Bloodborne essay called Visceral Femininity by Honeybat. It's 47 minutes. If you could sit through my video, highly recommend it. Really good essay about femininity in Bloodborne and its role in boss design and blood in the concept of menstruation and cycles of the moon. It's a really fascinating video. Definitely recommend giving it a look. Also, just realized as I'm going through, I forgot to mention, Vicar Amelia, I'm saying it right now, heals when she's at low health, and there are consumable items in the area prior that you can throw to disrupt that healing, or you can try to out-damage it if your damage is at that point, which rewards you for exploring and finding the Witches of Hemwick area and all that kind of jazz. I really like this move. It has items that you can interact with that have very little, if any, other purpose outside of PvP. They're all directly right here. You can run out of them, but she's very beatable without it because you can still very easily hit her while she's doing this healing ability, and it's not outrageous to if not out damage, get close to undoing most of the effect of the healing, so long as you're being aggressive, which again, a lot of those beasts are trying to push you towards. Also, on the matter of Vicar Amelia, the voice acting in Bloodborne is, in my mind, the best in the series. There are some great vocal performances. I'm a huge fan of Ishinashina. As I mentioned prior, there are a couple of voice lines in Elden Ring that I am going to gush about when we get to that. But the atmosphere created from every scream, every wail, everything that the bosses are doing is so perfect. I didn't mention it for a lot of bosses, and it is 100% going in my Elden Ring because it was an oversight. Vicar Amelia is one of them. Gehrman's screams of effort. Even Gascoigne's roars right at the start, that first time that he switches from doing that guttural humanoid roar that is distinctly humanoid in those first two phases to that first beast screech. Incredible sound design across the board from Bloodborne. Next one is Rom. I had Rom's lore off. That's another one. Namely, Rom is not a natural Old One. Rom is a man-made Old One. The only true Old Ones are the Amygdalas, Abritus, the Moon Presence, and the Orphan of Kos. Apparently, in Abritus' battle arena, there's even a corpse of one of the Roms that was created from Abritus' image. Which brings me to the boss that I was apparently fighting incorrectly, namely being the Watchdog of the Old Lords. I've never had luck dodging into because I keep getting hit by a fire after effect, but apparently if you are standing right in front of the Watchdog, you can get through the attacks and attack the limbs. And the head does not take more damage until you've broken the head. So the strategy that a lot of people utilize is get through, break the limbs to lead to a stagger, to get to the head, break the head to deal more damage on the head, making it a significantly shorter fight. I forgot to mention that Amygdala can also be damaged via hitting its arms. As Extreme Sam, hello again, mentions, not the ripped off ones in the third phase, obviously, because it's disconnected. But other than that, you can hit the arms for damage as well. The head is, for me, just a little more reliable. Next, we have a bit of a Lawrence defender popping up that I want to give a voice to. Namely, the fact that Lawrence is arguably the single most important figure in the lore, and the entire point is that he is nothing. He is incredibly insignificant, and combining with the music, I can kind of see this argument, especially with the fact that though I don't think Lawrence's second phase makes him easier in the way it was intended, it does make him significantly more pathetic. He is crawling, he is vomiting, he is just gushing. There is barely even the remnants of a beast left here. Personally, it still feels like it's lingering behind what could have been. There were a lot of arguments on this comment as to, oh no, but Lawrence was only a piece of, oh, they ran out of time, so they reused the boss. I feel boss reuses can be more specific than that. And I think Lawrence was reused as a cleric beast for a reason. I just think that reason didn't work. Another one people believe I underrated is one of my high tier A bosses, being the Orphan of Kos, with specifically the whimpering sounds being mentioned, which again, I neglected a lot of that voice acting when I was doing my Bloodborne analysis, and yeah, those sounds are incredible. They are so violently uncomfortable in the best ways. When I played the DLC for the first time, I had not figured out blood gems. I was not using them efficiently. I was running out of things, and I got stuck at Maria and ended up deciding I wanted to beat the game. And I came back later, really dove into the system and really got it, beat Maria without nearly as much trouble, and then fought Kos. Probably the biggest, I don't want to say robbery, but the biggest slight I've done to myself to hurt my enjoyment of the DLC. Because enjoying the first half and loving that first half, I loved Ludwig, and even though I was losing, I was loving Maria, I didn't end up getting that Orphan of Kos experience. By the time I reached the Orphan, I knew what I was expecting. And so I do think there's a heavy argument that Kos should have deserved an S, and when I do a full list at the end of the series, it's possible he might sneak his way up into the top of that tier there, because as I'm looking back at it, I don't know what would make it better. It is incredible, it's atmospheric, the moveset works, everything hits, it's difficult but not absurdly hard, and it's behind bosses that make sure that you know what you're doing with blood gems, as proven by me. And so, yeah, honestly, I probably shorted Orphan of Kos. Which brings me to a bit of a monologue I wanted to go on. I had a couple of comments here, a lot of them telling me that I'm bad at Bloodborne, because I am bad at Bloodborne. Bloodborne is by far the game in this series I am the worst at. I'm not trying to hide that. I'm not trying to deny that. But someone mentioned I died 5 times to the one reward and that made me almost drop the game. Yes. And I died 55 times to Maria before I decided to end the game. And even when I decided not to fight Maria, I wasn't angry at Maria. I didn't never want to play the game again. I just decided I can't do this right now. The One Reborn made me question, why am I bothering? Because the entire fight is so long, so boring, so unengaging, and then you suddenly take counter damage, taking double damage from some bodies falling on you, and you die, because I was not leveling vitality enough my first playthrough. And so you die 5 times to that, and you have to run your way through that entire cart with all the corpses to smack an incredibly boring boss, and then die randomly to one hit with 20 of your blood vials left. Why? There hadn't been a boss that I was really wowed with since Gascoigne, and I liked Vicar Amelia. The Shadows of Yharnam were decent. Rom was decent, but it's all just decent. And now we're here. What do I have to look forward to? Has the game already peaked? So yes, dying 5 times to the One Reborn made me almost drop the game, because the One Reborn is just that bad a fight. It is atrocious. Which, talking of balancing, I'm going to block out this user's name because I'm not doing this to target them. They are saying that running out of blood vials in Bloodborne means you're just not good at these games. So you shouldn't really complain about it, because if you were good at these games, you'd have enough blood vials and it wouldn't be a problem. This is a bad argument. The big reason why actually comes from the Dark Souls 3 video of someone mentioning playing Dark Souls 3 for the first time when they were a kid, and it took them 2 days to beat Iudex Gundyr. Iudex Gundyr is notoriously simple. Dark Souls 3 is not just for people who are good at video games. Bloodborne is not just for people who are good at video games. Anyone can play FromSoft games. Saying you have to be good at these games to play them robs FromSoft of what they've done. These are some of the most atmospheric, the most incredible, the most astonishing games ever made. And times where it makes it hard to say, no, I'm going to try over and over and over again until I force myself to learn this. So yes, I will 100% stay with my stance. Blood vials are bad. With that little rant done, we're going to end on Moon Presence. Namely, with the fact of how feral Moon Presence feels. It is absolutely terrified. It cannot control you. You've killed other gods. The music playing is your boss music. That's why it is the main theme, returning back to that. The power of this beast is not working on you. It is scared. That's why it's moving so frantic, why it breaks away from the peaceful movements prior. That is an incredible piece of design. Absolutely love that. On top of that, he also has an attack that stops you from using blood vials, and if he does the 1 HP attack, that definitely gets more threatening, because then you have to rely on that rally mechanic right off the bat. That said, I've beaten the Moon Presence 5 or 6 times now, and I've never actually seen this attack. So I think that says something about how frequently he says it, and particularly how often he'd combo it with his already pretty rare 1 hit point attack. Alright, Dark Souls 3. Firstly, thing to bring up. I kind of alluded to it with the fact that all the bosses went on fire in their phase 2, but that's them becoming embered. The exact same thing you're doing. I don't know why I didn't directly mention that, but Verdant Terradidium? I'm not sure how to pronounce that. But they're 100% correctly, that is what they are doing. They are embering in the same way you are. Which brings me to Ashen Ones, that I was wrong about Sigurd. He is in Ashen One. Which also brings me to another Sigurd lore thing. There was some back and forth in the comments as to whether or not you were immediately teleported away after defeating Yorm if Sigurd was there and Yorm was your 3rd lord. From what I was looking online, a lot of what I was finding said that if you beat Yorm and Sigurd is present, the trigger for the teleportation is moving towards the bonfire a certain amount. So it's possible that when I ran into it and was teleported away, it's because instead of talking to Sigurd, I went towards the bonfire, which triggered the teleportation. But I'm also not sure if that means that if you are close to the door, how far do you have to run? If Sigurd is up by the bonfire when he sits down, would that affect it? Is that why there's different testimonies in the comments? I'm not 100% sure. I might have been wrong with that little criticism. or might be a lot more varied based off of what's happening there. Old Demon King next, and this time mentioning that they found the Old Demon King and similar bosses are more subtle than Sif was in making you question yourself. Because when you're fighting Sif, there is already a sadness in the arena that the limping just adds on to. When you walk into the Old Demon King's arena, your first thought isn't, wow, this is going to be sad. In some ways, it ends up being more of a subversion, more memorable by the fact that the Old Demon King, it is a demon, it is a monster hiding in these piles of corpses in this nightmarish lake, is trying to make you feel sad. I think that's a really good point about Old Demon King that I didn't give him points for. Yeah, Sif's Last Stand I do find sadder personally myself, but the Old Demon Kings you don't see coming. It tries to blindside you more as you realize, oh wait, this thing is dying. And I do really love that design. I think it deserves a shout out. Bringing up Aldrich, some people have brought up that the second phase bow attack is very much a mess, namely because there is nothing stopping him from just doing it again and again and again and again. And I do think if that wasn't there, he'd be rating a little bit higher. I personally still love him, but if there was a timer, an invisible timer running in the background while you fought Aldrich, that would definitely raise him even more, because the fact that those attacks can spam and overlap on each other, that's the one thing that does hold him back. Nameless King, I didn't mention his story. And I remember when Dark Souls 3 was coming out, the amount of conspiracy and theory crafting and debate that was happening about who this was. Was it Ornstein? Was it Solaire? Was it some other thing? Obviously, it's Gwyn's firstborn, but what else does that mean? There is so much more that I should have delved into there. There is a ton of lore packed into that area that makes the Archdragon Peaks, and specifically the Nameless King, even more satisfying to find. Then, popping into the DLC, you probably noticed this when I did the Old Monk, I was probably unfair to Half-Light as a PvP boss. On one hand, I was a little bit unfair because I'm not a PvP person myself, but I have to also mention not only is it disadvantageous for one player, it is violently disadvantageous for the invader if they're outnumbered, which, for Dark Souls 3, they will probably be. Then, the last thing I wanted to do, Rigorm136 gave some general critiques that caught a lot of things. I already mentioned the Siegvard one, but there's a couple other things I wanted to mention here. Firstly, the Dragon Slayer armor does have lore that I wasn't aware of, implied by the description of the Sacred Oath miracle that you get from the Sunlight Altar outside of the arena. Namely, that this was the armor of a knight who served the Nameless King and Ornstein, which means this, logically, would have been one of the first Warriors of Sunlight, potentially the first. On top of that, I got a lot of things wrong regarding the Champion and the Great Wolf. Firstly, it is not Artorias that it is guarding, it is the grave of the Champion that the Grave Tender is guarding. I got that wrong because I remember this coming out and Artorias' grave being the big theory. Looking through, I now see there was an initial burst of it's Artorias' grave in the first weeks that the game came out, and then that went away because people very quickly realized that was completely wrong. And I had still grabbed onto that from when the game came out, so that was on me. On top of that, the Great Wolf does have a second phase. When his eyes are red and he's doing those charges, that's a second phase. I don't know why I never noticed that there was a change here. I just thought he was doing more damage, and I hadn't gotten the charge yet. There's also a neat little interaction that if the champion is still alive when the Great Wolf howls, he gains a damage buff signified by a red aura permeating off the weapon. He also becomes more passive and starts using sorceries, which I've never seen because I've always focused him down. Half-Light also does not apparently lock you out of Midir. You can use the invisible wall before Half-Light is dead. I thought it was the other way around. And Sekiro. Firstly, prosthetics. These two comments summarize it really well. Firstly, mentioning that the thrusting spear can remove armors from certain mini-bosses later in the game and remove the parasite from the headless ape. I knew the parasite from the headless ape. I did not know that there were actually mini-bosses that you could use the armor to take it off of that. So that's really neat. On top of that, Loaded Flame Vent can set bosses ablaze with one charged use. Snake Eyes is actually weak to poison. The Malcontent Whistle works on the Headless in addition to the Demon of Hatred. And there are upgrades to the Shuriken that can focus down Lady Butterfly faster. And that's even just the start of it. The Seven Spears Ashina rematch. At the end of the game, you can just use the whistle. Learn one of them specifically over, or use a sugar and get that. I had been using the whistle in normal enemies, I just never used the whistle on that. So I was 100% way too harsh on the 7 Ashina Spears rematch. That guy should be getting bumped up pretty significantly there. Meanwhile, one slight defense that I agree with, but I don't think boosts the boss, is the Blazing Bull, namely that it also takes more damage if you hit him from his head. That said, the fact that it's unintuitive and the fact that the burn builds up so fast is dissuading you. But there is a lot more design to the Blazing Bull, a lot more intention that I gave it credit for. That intention just doesn't come out. It is the Sakura Bull of the palace. Its name is not Sakura, it is a Sakura Bull. Talking about names, Long-Armed Centipede Giraffe is a mistranslation. Apparently, its name was something like Kirin, and it translated into another name that was somewhat close to the word giraffe. So, good job, localization team. Mentioning next, you might have seen it on an earlier comment, but I'm bringing it back up here. You can insta-kill Shishiman warriors with the anti-air death blow, and the small arm version of the long arm centipedes. You just have to jump and then you can insta-kill them. Next, mentioning a couple things regarding the Shura variant of Ishin Ashina. Namely, that there is a precision specifically to his one mind attack that I did not really go into. After I got hit by it twice, I just started firecrackering through it so that I didn't have to handle it. If you successfully deflect the last hit of the one mind, similarly to the Headless Ape, he does a huge stumble, giving you a huge opportunity to parry that off. I need to suck it up and just give myself a no firecrackers allowed run of Ishin Ashina. And honestly, I think that's something I need to do in general. I just need to do a no firecrackers run on a low health to force myself to really get that. Because as you probably saw in the footage, I use firecrackers a lot, and I think the Shura Ishin Ashina might have been held back, particularly by that, because I was avoiding a lot of the bigger attacks by just not engaging with them. Finishing up the Sekiro, like I said, it's a lot shorter of a comment section than Bloodborne and Dark Souls 3. The Demon of Hatred is fought in the arena where you fight Gyogu the Demon. On top of that, there's a lady there who is telling you that there is a demon coming, that there is a war coming here, and it is exactly what happens. On top of that, his moveset is inspired by Kabuki movements, which is a style of martial arts from my understanding. It ends up feeling so natural and so monstrous, despite the fact that there is a really direct precision to all of his movements, and I think it's a really good point towards the visual design of the Demon of Hatred that I think pays off. And then, wrapping up with Demon Souls, firstly, Flame Lurker. Namely, shields are huge for Flame Lurker. There are a ton of fire shields, one of them that you get right at the start of the game that deflects almost everything, 90% of fire damage, which is really high for shields. And on top of that, strafing backwards rather than rolling backwards ends up helping move around a lot of the attacks because you don't move far enough for him to lunge far enough forward, and you're able to step out before stepping back in, so it punishes your rolling tendencies. Old King Allant, I wanted to correct. In the original PS3 version, it looks like you needed to beat at least one Archdemon to enter 1-3, and all Archdemons to enter 1-4. In the new one, you just need one Archdemon, and then you can enter both 1-3 and 1-4. That said, that was another one similar to Sigvard, that there was a lot of argument back and forth as to what was or wasn't unlocked, but that's what I got just by doing some lookups. I also got a great comment about True King Allant, namely that the core of the fight was to be pity, to realize this is what happens from those who seek demon souls. There is nothing worth listening to. He is a monster who is completely responsible for everything bad that's happened to him here. You should erase him and move on with your life. And that pity, I think, is a really compelling idea, and I really gained a little more respect for the fight off of that. I might give it a D grade now, so thank you, Winter Dragon 2004. And then the last correction, the last thing I need to go over is the ending of Demon Souls. My take in the video was that the options were to save the world by erasing the demons and removing the fog, or let the demons win by gaining their control, whereas Mir and I pointed out that the ending is much more ambiguous. Yes, there is a new monumental, and we know where that will lead if the world ends, but what happens when it's gone? Is the world even in a state that something can be fixed? Is there a world left to save? And on that note, thank you for joining me in this adventure. Like I said, this is the first time I've ever done an unscripted video. We're gonna see how much I like editing my random nonsensical spin-offs and dialogues on these comments that I found and pulled off, and wanted to thank everyone again who left comments. I'm hoping that I'll have that Elden Ring video soon. I'm about halfway to 2/3 of the way done with the script for the first part of the video, so I'm excited, and I'll look forward to seeing you in a couple weeks for that.